I've always thought of myself as a pretty ordinary guy, My wife, Lena, and I aren't the sort of people you'd expect to have a story. We're just regular folks, the kind who plan vacations around what we can afford and spend weekends catching up on laundry. But something happened to us in northern Norway, something I can barely think about without getting a cold, sick feeling in my stomach. I need to tell you about it because it still haunts me. Maybe getting it out on paper will help. I don't know. It started like this. Lena and I had always dreamed of seeing the northern lights. You've seen pictures, right? Those shimmering curtains of green and purple dancing across the sky. We couldn't afford much, but we found a deal on a trip to this little village called Torsvik. It was a tiny place, just a cluster of wooden houses and a general store, surrounded by miles of snowy wilderness. It wasn't exactly what I pictured when I thought about Norway, but the travel blogs all said it was a great spot to see the aurora, untouched by light pollution, the ads promised. Before we continue the story, please like and subscribe our channel and press the bell icon so that you receive the notifications for our new stories. The moment we arrived, something felt off. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on. The air was crisp and cold, and the snow crunched under our boots. The villagers were friendly enough, but there was this quietness about them that made my skin crawl. They smiled, sure, but it was this tight-lipped, distracted kind of smile, like they knew something they weren't telling us. We checked into the only inn in town. It was a creaky old building with thick wooden beams and a roaring fireplace in the common area. The innkeeper, a woman named Sigrid, showed us to our room. She was polite but distant, the kind of person who seems to be listening to something far away when you talk to them. I chalked it up to cultural differences, but Lena seemed uneasy. She kept glancing at Sigrid, like she was trying to figure something out. That first night, we bundled up and went outside to watch the sky. It was colder than I've ever felt, the kind of cold that bites through your clothes and settles in your bones. The northern lights were everything I'd hoped for, though. They moved like living things, twisting and flowing across the heavens in a way that made my chest ache. Lena held my hand and leaned her head against my shoulder, and for a while, I forgot about the weird vibe of the village. But then, the sound started. At first, I thought it was just the wind. It was a soft, whistling noise rising and falling in pitch. But the longer I listened, the more it sounded intentional, like someone was humming a tune, just on the edge of hearing. Lena must have heard it too, because she tensed up and squeezed my hand. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. "Yeah," I said. "It's probably just the wind." She nodded, but I could tell she didn't believe me. Honestly, I didn't believe myself. There was something about the sound that didn't sit right, something that made my stomach twist. We stayed outside for a little while longer, but the magic of the northern lights had worn off. The humming was getting louder, or maybe just closer. Either way, we decided to head back to the inn. As we walked, I kept looking over my shoulder. The village was dead silent except for the crunch of our boots on the snow. That humming sound followed us all the way to the door, fading only when we stepped inside. That night I couldn't sleep. The room was warm, and Lena was curled up next to me, but my mind wouldn't shut off. I kept hearing that sound, playing over and over in my head. It was so faint, like someone whispering into a microphone with the volume turned way down. I told myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Around 3 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom. The hallway was dark, and the floorboards creaked under my feet. As I walked back to our room, I thought I saw something move at the end of the hall, just a flicker of motion, like a shadow darting out of sight. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer. I waited for what felt like an eternity, my eyes straining to see into the darkness. Nothing, just the faint sound of the wind outside. I shook my head, trying to laugh at myself. I was being stupid, just tired and jumpy. But when I got back to the room, Lena was sitting up in bed, wide-eyed. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice still shaky. "I thought I heard someone whispering," she said, "right outside the door." That was just the beginning. Over the next few days, the humming became a constant presence. It wasn't always there, but when it was, it felt like it was coming from everywhere at once. We tried to ask the villagers about it, but they just shrugged and avoided our eyes. One old man muttered something in Norwegian and made a sign with his hand, like he was warding off evil. Sigrid overheard and scolded him sharply, but she wouldn't tell us what he said. Lena wanted to leave. She begged me to pack up and go, even if it meant losing the money we'd spent on the trip. But I was stubborn. I didn't want to admit that I was scared, even though I was. I kept telling her it was just local superstition, that we were overreacting. Looking back, I wish I'd listened to her. The worst night was the last one. We were lying in bed, trying to ignore the humming that had started up again. It was louder this time, a low, droning noise that made my teeth ache. Lena was clutching my hand so tightly it hurt, and I could feel her shaking. Then, the lights went out. The room plunged into darkness, so sudden and complete it felt like the walls had swallowed us whole. I fumbled for the lamp on the bedside table, but the switch didn't work. The humming sound grew louder, filling the room like a swarm of angry bees. Lena let out a small, stifled cry, and I grabbed her hand. "It's just a power outage," I said, my voice shaking. Probably the snow knocked something loose. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The sound wasn't normal. It wasn't anything natural. It felt alive, like it was burrowing into my head. "Tom," Lena whispered. "It's in the room." I felt my stomach drop. I couldn't see a thing, but I could feel something. The air had changed, like it was pressing down on us. It was colder, too so cold that I could see my breath, even in the pitch black. "Stay here," I said, though I had no idea where I was going or what I could possibly do. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, using its faint light to guide me toward the door. The moment I opened it, the humming stopped. I stood there in the doorway, my heart pounding in my ears. The hallway was empty, lit only by the faint moonlight coming through a frosted window at the far end. It was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that feels too heavy, too full. I stepped out, my breath clouding in front of me, and called out again. "Hello?" No answer, just that awful, smothering quiet. I turned back to the room, shining my phone's light on the bed. Lena was sitting up, her knees drawn to her chest, her eyes wide and shining with fear. "Do you hear it?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't know what to say. The sound was gone, but the feeling wasn't. That pressure in the air, that crawling sensation on the back of my neck, it was still there, as if something was waiting, just out of sight. I closed the door and locked it, even though I knew it wouldn't make a difference. The rest of the night passed in fits and starts. Every time I thought I was starting to drift off, I'd jolt awake, sure I'd heard something. A creak, a whisper, footsteps. Lena didn't sleep at all. She just sat there, staring at the door, as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. When the sun finally came up, we decided we'd had enough. I didn't care about the money anymore. I just wanted to get out of that place. We packed our bags in record time and went downstairs, hoping to catch Sigrid and settle our bill. The common room was empty. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, and the front desk was abandoned. I called out for Sigrid, but there was no answer. Lena tugged on my arm, her eyes darting around nervously. "Let's just go," she whispered. We left some cash on the desk and hurried outside. The village was eerily quiet, even for such a small place. The streets were empty, and the houses looked abandoned, their windows dark and lifeless. A thick fog had rolled in overnight, blurring the edges of everything. As we walked toward our car, I felt that pressure again, that same heavy feeling from the night before. It wasn't just in the air, it was in the ground, in the trees, in the very walls of the village. Lena clutched my arm, her steps quick and unsteady. "Do you feel that?" she asked. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. When we reached the car, I noticed something strange. The windows were fogged up, which wasn't surprising given the cold. But there were marks on the glass, faint smudges that looked like handprints. They weren't ours, we hadn't been near the car since the day before. Lena noticed them too. She stopped dead in her tracks, her hand flying to her mouth. "Tom," she said, her voice barely audible, "what is that?" I didn't answer. I didn't want to think about it. I unlocked the car and threw our bags in the back, not even bothering to arrange them. Lena climbed into the passenger seat, her eyes fixed on the windshield. The moment I started the engine, the humming returned. It was louder now, impossibly loud, vibrating through the car like a physical force. I slammed my foot on the gas, not caring about the icy roads. We just needed to get out of there. The fog closed in around us, thick and suffocating, but I kept driving, following the faint outline of the road. As we sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw something moving in the fog. Not a person, not an animal, just a shape, shifting and flickering like a shadow made of smoke. We didn't stop driving until we reached a larger town, hours away from Torsvik. We checked into a hotel and spent the rest of the day huddled in our room, too shaken to do anything but sit there in silence. We didn't talk about what had happened, not really. How could we? There were no words for it, no way to explain what we'd experienced. But we both knew deep down that it wasn't over. That thing, whatever it was, it had followed us. Even now, months later, I still hear the humming sometimes. It comes at night, faint and far away, just on the edge of hearing. And every time I feel that same cold, heavy pressure, like the air is closing in around me. Lena and I don't talk about Norway. We don't talk about the northern lights, or the village, or the whispers in the dark. But I see it in her eyes. The same thing I feel in my gut. We brought something back with us. And it's still waiting.